All right, essay number 55, Shakers of New Lebanon. We're here reading American Miscellany, published in 1865. We've just finished essay number 54 on ancient wine press, and we're moving on page 132 of American Miscellany. We're on essay number 55, Shakers of New Lebanon. Perhaps there is no sect whose principles and forms have been so misrepresented and so little understood by the world as the people called Shakers. We have no doubt our readers will be interested in reading a description of a Sunday past in the green lap of New Lebanon as the oldest and richest establishment of that most singular people in this country. There, in the midst of that sweet circle of picturesque and verdant hills, two extremes of modern life have nestled down: fashionable society around the springs, which suggest, at least if they do not exactly afford, physical comfort and health, and a couple of miles off, that sober company of separatists around what they deem springs of living water welling up to everlasting life. They are associationists in their way, which truly is a most negative and inverse way to one who is a believer in the passions, as the essential springs of all good energy in man, fed from the fountain of divine love, but they illustrate some of the advantages of combination, and were moved to seek a lesson from them. Their industry we could not see, it being Sunday, but there was a chance for us to spell out something in their life ideal from the strange symbols of their worship. Passing their highly cultivated gardens and their neat plain dwellings, we came to the meeting house, a spacious and quaint structure, which had yet a certain architectural beauty of its own. By its lead-colored, semi-cylindrical long roof and its starched air of neatness, it resembled a meek Quaker bonnet, while the details of doors and windows and green blinds were graceful and appropriate. Yet use and plainness evidently were the only presiding canons of their art. The side on which we entered was filled from end to end with curious spectators like ourselves, though few of them, we fancy, regarded the matter in so serious a mood as we did. Upon the other side, across the spacious, smooth floor, gleaming like a sheet of letter paper, and so clean that not a speck was visible upon it, we caught the full ensemble of the worshippers, ranged on benches running half across the room, benches without backs, sitting demure, their hands upon their knees, rows of men opposite to rows of women. The first glimpse of the latter startled us like a scene in the tombs. They looked so much like white and sheeted ghosts in their death-like linen caps and facial bandages, and robes that hung so straight and close to the gaunt figures, old and young, alike reduced to the same pattern, of which the ideal seemed the extinction of any most remote suggestion of beauty. The men and boys in their old mannish uniform looked generally hale and cheerful, with a shrewd twinkle in the eye, displayed a placid and submissive manner. Most of them were gentle and mechanical-looking persons, but here and there was one more imposing and ambitious-looking figure, who seemed as if he should have passions, and whose existence amid that monotonous, tame life we could not so readily account for. But the women were a sad sight. On them falls the heaviest penalty of this dear-bought and unnatural peace. The gravity of the scene was certainly impressive. Assuming that a life which satisfies so many and so long, and which has so succeeded in an outward way, could not have nothing at the core of it, and that the inner sense of their peculiarities must form a consistent whole of some sort, we gave respectful and studious attention to the exercises which now opened. An aged voice, proceeding somewhere from the center of the worshippers, we could not see the person, congratulated them upon the return of their sweet privilege of worshipping God after their own manner and understanding. This was simply and briefly said, and in a tone not cold nor formal, but quite human. Then, by a simultaneous movement, whence communicated we could not tell, they were all on their feet at once, and began to pile away the benches in their respective corners, male and female, to make an open area for what was to follow, and stood waiting in their own cross rows again. An elder then stepped forward and addressed the spectators, respectfully requesting them to abstain from talking, laughing, and other interruptions, and especially setting forth their law of cleanliness, which had been grossly outraged on the previous Sunday by some low tobacco-spitting visitors who had come to sneer and be amused. The lesson was timely and impressive, and judging from the entire effect it took upon the crowd, we should say that some of them could not have attended church to better purpose. We should not wonder if some careless hearts had the idea of outward purification seriously engraved upon them there, for the first time perhaps in their lives. The speaker said he was aware that their customs were singular, naturally causing astonishment and even ridicule in those who could not understand them as they did, but he gently reminded them of the respect due to their peculiarities, to which they had a perfect right. Indeed, they all evinced a perfect sane consciousness of their relative position to the rest of the world, which they did not suffer to disturb them. The most singular thing about their singularities was the absence of all fanatical intoxication. In the songs and dances which ensued, we saw nothing of that violence and frenzy which... Frenzy is spelled P-H-R-E-N-S-Y. Frenzy. Gotta bring that back. In the songs and dances which ensued, we saw nothing of that violence and frenzy which have been reported of them. All was moderate, deliberate, and self-possessed, no distortions whirling round on tiptoe, groans, or frantic shouts. The spirit did not seem to wrestle with them, but to descend upon them soothingly, and we were convinced that the spirit of their system is subdued and quiet, and that if such things ever occur as above hinted, they are only exceptional. First came a spiritual hymn or chant sung standing, to a very homely, humdrum, secular sort of tune, with a brisk, jig-like motion. It was sung in unison, all the voices on one part, from gruffest bass to shrillest treble, the very plainest, baldest thing that could be called music, having a rhythm and a melody, but rigorously rejecting all unnecessary wealth and coloring of harmony. The close of every song was marked by unisonous sepulchral lengthening out of the last note. The close of every song was marked by a unisonous sepulchral lengthening out of the last note. There resigned the same neatness and correctness in this performance as in their costume and their clean floor. No false notes or slips of time. It was music emptied of the sentiment of beauty, of which all their ways betray a horror. It was music as an exercise, a ceremony, and not as a fine art, the ghost or skeleton of music, enough to show that they do believe in measure, rhythm, order, but not in the charm and beauty. They seem to recognize the inherent presence of music in the very law of life, to accept the symbol of pervading harmony, but they reject the ultimate expression and result thereof in forms of art and beauty. They study to possess the law without the concretion and embodiment of it in nature. It seems the very essence of their creed to wage exterminating war with nature, to soak out the blood and coloring substances from life's fleshy tissue, and simply keep the pale and lifeless form. And so if they accept the visits of the angel Saint Cecilia, it is only when she comes in a mob cap and straight gown of a ghostly white and promises to leave behind her every tempting charm and everything that can lend worth to earth. For the Shaker wants the spiritual without the material, not the spiritual in the material. Life without passion, unity without variety, use without beauty, law without attraction, and purity by sheer simplistic abstinence are his fancied solution, but in reality evasion of the grand life problem. Next came a dance, 2 by 2 the men and 2 by 2 the women, getting time and impulse from the jig-like hymn of their own chanting. both hands dangling loose and fin-like before the breast, went journeying round the room in circles with strange limping step, stout old men and starch old maidens, spite of solemn faces, stepping off as briskly as the youngest, and forgetting the apparent loss of dignity in the profound obedience of all of this. Some of the older and infirm members only stood still and looked on, but kept up the same dangling of the hands as if to fan the flame. Occasionally they would pause in the middle of these divine circles, as one of the speakers called them, and the silence would be broken by some female voice, supposed to be under the moving of the Spirit, declaring her unspeakable satisfaction in this life, and that she felt that she had found God, and a few more sentences to this effect, which was answered in like quiet manner, passionless and mechanical, by some other sister or some old man, or young convert warmly giving his experience. Then they would journey on again with steady, earnest pertinacity, as if by way of symbolizing the dull journey of life.